Now, that's the end of it, and I open it to Q&A, but I cheat first. Because I ask and answer 2 questions first. Because these tend to come up, and I think they're important to come up, so I ask these anyway. Didn't the vegan pioneers, especially in Watson, talk a lot about health and diet? That is true. There's a reason for that. Right? It's not because that was their vision and that they thought veganism was a diet. That's not what it was. It was because the vegans tried to get the vegetarian society to have a non-dairy section, and the vegetarians said, no, that's too radical. And so they thought, okay, we'll have to break free, right? And all the vegetarians then said to them, you're gonna die. All the doctors said to them, you're gonna die. The prevailing values of the time was that if you went vegan in those days, you're gonna fucking die. Right? That's what was gonna happen, right? And so they had to kind of prove in a way that veganism as a diet was actually viable, that you could actually survive on a vegan diet. And of course, we got to go back to the time when this was happening. Still the time of ration, you know, the end of a world war. They're still getting ration. Watson was on reduced rations, I think, because he was a conscientious objector. You know, he had his kind of benefits, as it were, taken off him, or at least reduced. So they had a kind of job to show that people could actually physically survive as a vegan. And so that's why the very early days, especially for Watson, it was kind of like taken up with that. But don't get fooled that that's what that they thought veganism was all about. And I mean, it's kind of, again, I feel a bit sorry for Watson because he had to go through that period of actually saying to people, well, look, you know, and actually some of the early vegans did get sick. B12 wasn't known in those days, right? And so some of them did get kind of sick. And then the idea of supplementation and all the rest of it came about, and you know, that's still an issue in the vegan community, as we know. This one is very important. This raises the spectre of our friend Gary Francione, if everybody knows who that is. But it also, I tend to quote my good friend from the past, Ronnie Lee, who was the co-founder of the Animal Liberation Front. Now, what Ronnie explains, and there's a great video, great audio of this, is that when he became vegan, which was 1972, veganism was hardly known. I mean, when I went vegan, it was only 30 years after the formation of the social movement, but Ronnie was like 10 years ahead. And when it came to the social movement organizations in the animal rights movement, or whatever you want to call it, then they were all run by meat eaters, he says. So you obviously get some of the single issue people, League Against Cruel Sports and all this, these are all run by meat eaters. When it got to the 1980s, things were starting to move on the vegan front. And suddenly all these organizations were being run by vegans. But that didn't change their campaigning. The League Against Cruel Sports still remained a single-issue anti-blood sports group based on parliamentary action. Compassionate World Farming, there's a lot of vegans involved with Compassionate World Farming, but they were still a very traditional animal welfare group. Compassionate World Farming was never abolitionist. It was all about going back to extensive animal farming. They were against factory farming. They wanted to ban factory farming, right? But they're not opposed to animal farming overall, you know? And it's only really this century, the 21st century, when veganism, as we know it now, has been something that we campaign for. In other words, to use Francione's thing, it's become the moral baseline of the movement. Yeah? I mean, I know that's controversial. I mean, Wayne Sean from DXE, he writes boycott veganism because he thinks that activism is the baseline of the vegan movement. But, you know, veganism is the baseline of the animal rights movement. Yeah? And so the way that we campaign for veganism now, which we're all probably familiar with, where veganism is central, is new. It's only just started. Historically, it's just started. You know, in the 80s, I was a press person for the LF. I must have done hundreds of radio interviews and quite a few TV things. I don't remember talking about veganism. And none of the journalists asked me about veganism because you would go as a spokesperson for the ALF, or you'd go as a representative of Compassion World Farming, or as an anti-blood spurts person, or an anti-vivisection person. You wouldn't go as a vegan campaigner that covered everything like we do now. And so the journalists never even thought to ask. You know, I mean, I'm sure I remember somebody being asked about leather shoes and this kind of stuff. But the actual way that journalists talk to us now is changed. They didn't think to ask us about veganism, and we didn't think to answer about veganism. Because let's face it, every spokesperson now would, even if they weren't asked about veganism, their first answer would be about veganism. That's what they would do. That's how central veganism is. But the crucial part of it is it's new. The way that we're familiar with vegan campaigning has only just started historically. Now, it's really kind of interesting. You know, some reducitarians, like Matt Ball, will try and tell you that we've been doing vegan campaigning for decades and it's not worked. This is not true. We haven't been doing it for decades. We've only just started. And I think we'll all agree that in the last 5 years, there's been a massive growth in interest in veganism and everything. And really, in that sense, the fact that we only just started this century, we've done really well. Because we've got a new movement really taking off. The issue now, and I'm a sociologist and I've done social movement theory and stuff, the issue now is what's going to happen. Is it going to be too mainstream? Is it going to lose its radicalism? Is it going to become too professionalized? You know, because there's a concept in social movement theory called goal displacement, where when a movement does take off, like veganism has taken off, you get a lot of careerists coming in, a lot of people want to professionalize, a lot of entrepreneurs coming in, a lot of capitalists wanting to make a buck out of it, right? And they are all a threat to the core values. And it's the core values which I think is the heart of veganism. And that's why I do this talk. So thanks a lot. So have you got any genuine questions from the audience maybe? Hello.
What do you think of the Greg's vegan sausage roll?
Well, I've never
can't keep it on the shelves, apparently.
Yeah, I know, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, flying off the shelves.
It's got more salt apparently than the pig one, but yeah. I mean, I haven't got a problem with that. I mean, I'm a long-term vegan, and so I don't tend to eat a lot of that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of vegan I'm from Dublin, or based in Dublin, and there's a lot of the vegan places that have opened recently. I've never even been, you know, and there's some that I won't go to because it's kind of like vegan junk food.
Right.
You know, it's interesting because there's like a vegan junk food generation coming up. We said this in the car. What I'm looking forward to, once we get past this phase of everybody thinking we've got to make vegan versions of this, that, and the other, we'll then get on to making just new vegan foods. I remember arguing in the 1980s, you know, there's going to be stuff in the future that we don't even think about now because the R&D has not been done. You know, one of the things I say on the streets about vegan cheese and the vegan meats is that right from the 70s they could always get the taste. When they tried to get the texture, it ruined the taste. And it took kind of like 35, 40 years of R&D, and now it's getting together, BioLife and all that, and of course all the meats and everything. Mm-hmm. So I'm not opposed to it if that's what you're kind of thinking. I haven't tried it.
It's a recent news story though.
Yeah.
But also I saw an article today about somebody making vegan cheese in the Netherlands, and he's of the opinion that he wouldn't be taken seriously in the UK at all.
It's not going to be taken seriously.
As in that if they don't, he thinks that the Dutch people are all very open to new ideas, new things, and sort of fairly warm and approachable sort of people. But he said he didn't get the same reception. And
well,
there's
I just say to him, suck it and see, won't you?
Yeah.
He's going to
there's a new vegan cheese deli in London. It's been open for a couple of months now.
Yeah.
And again, they have been struggling to keep in stock.
Yeah.
As for what the current situation is with that shop, I don't know.
Well, I think it's a very exciting time, you know, the fact that we've got all these things coming online. The key to it, from my point of view, as you can probably gather, I'm an ethical vegan. The key to it is to maintain that focus. Because the research, we don't have a lot of research, but the research that we do have suggests that it's the ethical vegans who stay vegan. And there is a lot of people who drop out. And some people, some of the reducitarians celebrate this almost. Sometimes it could be as much as 80% of vegans stop being vegan, right? Now, that's not as bad as it sounds, because when you look at it, it ends up being 80% of plant eaters stop eating plants. They were never vegan in the first place. You know, the research suggests that the ethical vegans tend to stay vegan. Tom Reagan was saying we've got a revolving door problem. We've got one in, one out. So we seem to be able to recruit people, but retaining them is an issue. And I think that the way you do that is by making sure that people understand that at heart we're talking about an ethical idea here. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Hello.
Do you think we're going to have
Yes.
an anti-speciesist world in your generation?
I don't know, I mean, things have changed. I mean, things are moving so quick now. I've kind of got more and more optimistic. I've always been fairly optimistic, but I used to say that my generation's job, I mean, I'm 61 now, so I haven't got long, folks. But I used to say our generation's job is to lay down the foundation, and then a young generation like this lad here is gonna take over the reins, and they're going to be able to build. And so I used to argue that the stronger the foundation, just like building a house, the better it would be for the next generation. And I think the strong foundation is based on ethics. So that's why I'm very concerned that ethics, or there's a slimming down of veganism from all kind of ways, including from some of the activists, which is very distressing to me, to see a lot of activists wanting to make veganism smaller. And I'm going, why? It's a beautiful, brilliant, emancipatory idea. Why would you want to slim it down? And unfortunately, to bring politics into it, there's a great video called Total Liberation by Steve Best, and he argues that whatever our personal politics, we are a left-wing movement. In other words, our values are left values. He lists them. He says right-wing values are these. And when you look at the columns, we don't go for this, you know, country, boundaries, borders, all the Trump stuff. You know, unfortunately, though, there are some people in the vegan community now who have got these right-wing values, and for the first time, they've kind of found a footing in the movement, which they wouldn't have had in my generation. We wouldn't have had it because we were kind of naturally pro-intersectional in those days. You know, we would go sabbing on a Saturday, we would go to a demo on a Sunday or a raid or something, and on the Monday we'd be doing Reclaim the Night. And on the Wednesday, we'd be at a Rock Against Racism gig. It was all intertwined in those days. And David Nybert, the sociologist, has got a thing called the entanglements thesis. So he talks about how oppression and liberation are entangled. And I think that's how we've got to continue seeing it. And so there's a problem now. We've got a few kind of political voices, even fascist voices in the movement now. Steve Best in that video says they've got no place in our movement. And I agree. We should drum those bombs out, because they've got no place in a kind of movement with our values in it. I really think that strongly. Anybody else? Oh, the young lad.
Yeah. I'm not that young, I know.
You're younger than me, aren't you?
What I was going to say. Yeah. So, like, why do you think there's such a twist in the narrative? Why are right-wing values coming in?
Well, to be controversial about it, I would say there is a generation of angry Yourofski-inspired plant eaters. Because there is not much evidence that Gary Yourofski understood veganism too well. But he understood eating plants, and he understood about being angry, and he wanted to rape women who wore fur coats and this kind of stuff. And he was a very violent, juvenile punk, and he never grew up. But there is a generation of people now who really look up to this guy, and are still promoting his stuff. And just to clarify that, the famous speech, the Georgia Tech speech, and the Q&A is very good. If you could isolate that and throw away a lot of his toxic personality, that would be good. I mean, it's a similar kind of thing with Francione, funny enough. But both Garys are a problem. But I think that's part of it. I think historians of our movement will think that we took a wrong turn when Yourofski got so much influence. And another thing I think about that is that people don't realise I mean, I interviewed Yourofski about 2010-11 with AR Zone, Caroline Bailey's group, and we asked him to retract those violent statements about wanting to rape women and this kind of stuff, and he wouldn't. He said he thought his words were beautiful, you know. And since then, on Israeli TV, he said that meat eaters should have their eyes taken out, dipped in excrement and forced to eat them, and then shot. He was a very juvenile guy who had these kind of violence fantasies. Now we can't have him as a spokesperson for a justice-based movement. Another reason is Peter, but that's it. But
Well, he was sponsored by Peter,
Peter, the
wasn't
sexist, racist, ableist crap. I mean, I think Peter should be closed down. If we really are a justice movement, Peter should be shut down because it's full of shite.
What's that?
Yes.
What is that?
People for the ethical treatment of animals.
Right. I've noticed actually that people with a very heavily meat-based diet are more aggressive.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Seriously, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, I suppose that could be the thing. Take it in, you'll bring it back out.
Yeah,
I suppose.
But I think
Some of the vegan boxers are quite aggressive, aren't they? You know, David Hay and all that.
David Hay, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know about that as a general kind of thing, but I mean, I kind of take your point, I guess.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for speaking. I was just listening about Yourofski and stuff like that, and how the sort of YouTube discourse has somehow caused a lot of pseudo-intellectualism into the movement, and it's sort of a bit harmful. At the same stage, a lot of them have somehow done some good for the movement in terms of the shock movement. Now, I think a good thing about that is YouTube's kind of clamping down on that, so they can be more genuine and not say this bad stuff of shock value. So in that case, I was wondering, what's your opinion on very popular YouTuber? He said some very bad things, but it looks like he was only doing it for shock. Richard Burgess, Vegan Gains. I was just wondering what your view is on him.
It's pretty close to Yourofski, but going back to what you were getting at in the first place, social movement theory do talk about recruitment, and moral shocks is one way, and networking is another, and animal rights has kind of gone on the moral shock kind of way, you know. Whereas I think now, see, things has changed in the movement. We used to be looking for enemies to fight, and now we're looking for people to educate. So we're focused, instead of being focused on the supply side, close that down, ban that, right? We're talking about, let's try to get rid of cultural speciesism, because if we don't get rid of cultural speciesism, we've got a major problem. Going back to Vegan Gains, very right wing, I think Trump supporter, got pictures of himself kind of attacking himself with a knife, but also videos showing all his guns and everything. And again, he would be a big Yourofski fan. A lot of the most problematic people you'll find are Yourofski fans. Yeah. Yes, Dick.
But you tell them about your own website. You've a lot of stuff on your website that people can look back on, you know.
Thanks for that planted question there, Nick. Yeah, it's just veganinformationproject.cf. We couldn't afford org or something, but
Can you say that again, please?
veganinformationproject.cf. But there's we've got a lot of stuff on our Facebook page as well, including about 200 kind of posters, the meme type things. We've got lots of different things, some pro-sectional, all kinds of stuff, feminist-based stuff. Again?
Oh yes, sorry.
Yes,
I had two questions, but I thought best not to answer them. Ask them in succession.
But you did anyway. Go on.
At that part, sorry. I was wondering. I've been thinking a lot since I went veganism about the psychology of what makes someone go vegan. I was wondering if you have any insight on that over your years being vegan. My personal take on it at the moment would be kind of similar to Hannah Arendt's, which is the evil comes from the banality of evil.
Yeah, banality.
Not thinking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's an interesting one. Also, in a similar vein, I go to the Frankfurt School in Critical Theory, and I think there's a lot in terms of instrumental reason, kind of seeing others as instruments, and rather than seeing the beauty of a tree, you see a ream of paper. And I think that we do tend to see others in terms of how we can exploit them. So I do think that's kind of like an issue. I think it's probably too complicated to kind of give a kind of easy answer to that. On psychology in general, if I may say this, it distresses me a little bit that psychology, and especially sales psychology, has got such a grip in the movement over sociology. Because I think sociology brings better and deeper insights, personally. But psychology has given rise to reducitarianism and carnism, which is a concept that I don't like at all. It's a vegetarian idea. I don't understand. Maybe somebody can explain this. I don't understand why vegans talk about carnism. It's a Melanie Joy thing. I do know that a lot of vegans who use carnism don't actually know that Melanie Joy thought about it. When we interviewed her again for AR Zone, we said, why carnism and not speciesism? She said, well, carnism is a subset of speciesism. So right from the beginning, it was smaller than what we actually aimed at. We're aimed at cultural speciesism. That's our target, right? Carnism is really about meat eaters. And if you look at the early Melanie Joy stuff, it was all about meat eating, you know. So psychology generally has kind of got a grip of the movement, which distresses me, but I can't really give you an easy, quick answer to that very deep question, really.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. Just in my project in analogy, in GMIT, there's this new company called Morgan, and basically it's this farming society in itself, and they do like traditional Irish things like meat and so on, but it's mostly set on like farming and with like butter and so on, and things like that. And I was like approached by the person who was setting it up, and he said that he wanted to bring in more vegans and vegetarians for them to see the other side of
Come and see the rights violations, yeah.
yeah, the other side of everything that's going on. And I didn't really know how to respond to that, except for I do know that, it's like I've grown up in that stuff. But so how do you respond to people who think that basically that you're completely different from them, or that they can like change your mind by showing them this thing, even though it's already a huge part of society? Like they think that you're like boxed up and you don't know anything.
Yeah, that again is a bit of a complicated question, but really I think the core to it, I think, is the difference between welfare and rights. And I do think that farmers genuinely think that if only we vegans saw how lovely and kind they were to the other animals, they only have one bad day and all this kind of stuff, that we'd kind of come around a little bit. The fact that as animal rights people we would see whatever they do to them as rights violations kind of just short circuits that kind of possible dialogue, On a more general thing, which is probably straying from your question a little bit, so apologies, but I think that farmers shouldn't be afraid of vegans. I think in a vegan world there'll be more farmers, but I think the big mega farmers possibly should, because they'll probably go out of business. But I think there's going to be a lot of communal gardening in veganism, and people swapping things, and probably that old communal thing that used to happen in the 50s, where you would kind of have a rota thing where farmers would get together and go and do the crops in one farm, and then the next week there'd be another one until all of them was done. I think it would aid the kind of community aspect of farming, and I think a lot more people would be actually on the land and make the connection, and going back to Eva Batt, reconnecting with the soil almost. I know that doesn't quite answer that, but I think that we've got a different vision. They essentially have a vision which is based on animal welfare. We essentially have a vision which is based on animal rights. I tend to be a bit critical of a lot of animal people if they'll talk about cruelty all the time. That puts us in the welfare paradigm. I much prefer to base an argument and a conversation on the basis that other animals are rights bearers, and that because of that, our use of them are rights violations. It's a much stronger case than saying, oh, don't be cruel, which I think puts us in the welfare paradigm. But I do think that a lot of farmers just think that if they could just explain it to us, we'd kind of see that they're good guys, really. I think that's kind of what's going on possibly there.
Hi, I was just wondering what your opinion is on some vegan foods that would have sort of second-hand effects that would be bad for animals and the environment in general, stuff like palm oil and soy, which can offer chemical
My general answer to that is that justice for all means that any issue of injustice is a vegan issue. And I think that, when you got the Piers Beirne stuff about, bread and this kind of stuff, and the harms that are caused with vegan growing and vegan harvesting, they are real issues, right? But it's not as though we're not aware of those and we don't debate them like we don't debate palm oil. And I think that what would happen in a vegan world is we would try and address those, because vegans of all people are motivated to bring about change which would also change the harms we do in creating our food, right? We're almost like just trying to say, well, if we can get you lot to kind of stop killing them just intentionally, systematically and routinely and violating their rights, then once there's more vegans, once there's more ethical vegans and we get socio-political power, then we will turn our attention to palm oil. And we will then say to the farmers, we don't want you to harvest your crops in that way. Or people say, well, what about avocados and all that? And say, well, if it's not possible to have avocados without rights violations, we won't bloody have them then. Because it's not as though we're not known for going, well, we don't want that because it's full of rights violations. So if there's a plant that's full of rights violations, we won't have it. But we'll try and fix it. So it's a question of the fact that it's kind of something we're going to get around to. But at the moment, we're stuck in the fact that there's not enough of us to bring about that kind of change, because we really do kind of need socio-political power to bring about, because they're structural issues. Like the way that the farmers plough and reap their crops is very little that an individual vegan can do. But once we get enough power, we can then go, we want you to, for example, fit your equipment with subsonic devices, to warn the other animals that are on the way, this kind of thing. You would probably combine a field in a different way to leave spaces for the animals either to get away from and then have somewhere to go to get food and stuff. We would take all that into account. It's not as though we're oblivious to it. It's just that we kind of haven't been able to get around to it yet. Is everyone looking at the time, by the way, because we've got another speaker here?
I just have one question about it. When you first went vegan, did you think you'd spend so much time being deeply involved in the vegan movement, or is this kind of things just...
Yeah, I'm a natural fanatic. No, I guess not. I got involved through Hunt Sabs, actually, but also I got involved because I had this kind of idea about fairness. I always say that I remember jumping from kind of desk to desk when I was at school, letting the wasps out. Everybody else was trying to kill them. And my first job was as a cinema projectionist, and an usher took a shoe off, and there's a crane fly going at the wall, Daddy, flying down along it. She went bam like that. And I said, what do you do that for? I said, she said, I think they're really ugly. So I think you're pretty ugly, but I wouldn't have done that to you. And so I always had this feeling about fairness. And then when I read Reagan, I was given a kind of rights foundation to that feeling. And then I suppose it did become a kind of lifelong thing. So even in my teaching, I've incorporated all that. And I suppose it became the main thing that I was kind of going to do, And I think, to again quote Reagan, it is because I'm an extremist. And I hope that everybody else is. Because Reagan says he's an extremist when it comes to rape. He's against it all the time. He's an extremist when it comes to child molestation. He's against it all the time. So there is certain things that we are actually quite extreme about. And if journalists were to talk to us like they talk to animal rights people, it would sound really strange. Because you vegans, you don't eat this and you don't eat that. It'd be like kind of, you're a human rights person. Yeah, so you think humans have got rights? Yeah, they do. Well, even the women. Yeah. And the brown ones, surely the black ones too, It would, to put it into the human rights, it would be really weird. So I thought I'd suddenly found a calling, if you like, I guess. Yeah. I think we're going to have to let you on the stage, young man.
Fair enough. Yeah.